Good morning, and thank you all for joining us today. I'm J.R. DeShazo, Director of the Luskin Center for Innovation here at UCLA. The Luskin Center seeks to solve our most pressing environmental problems, conducting research on climate, clean energy, sustainable transportation, and water. I want to thank Renee and Meyer Luskin and the Rockefeller Brothers Foundation for supporting the research that we are going to present today and our ability to host this webinar, bringing you all together. As a land-grant institution, we at UCLA acknowledge and honor the sacrifice of the Gabrielino and Tongva peoples, as they were the traditional caretakers of Tungavar, the land upon which the UCLA campus now stands. I'm very excited to be able to welcome you to this webinar that focuses on, I think, a fact that has caught many of us by surprise, which is that the state of California has far surpassed its current renewable energy targets. And one of the reasons for that has been the emergence and rapid growth of community choice aggregators, which have unleashed the local demand for larger amounts of renewable energy demanded by communities. And we wanted to focus on both the accomplishment that represents and some of the direct and indirect effects that's had on our investor-owned utilities, as well as address some of the challenges more broadly that moving towards larger levels of renewable energy pose for the state. And to that end, we will have two short presentations of research, followed by a very esteemed panel of energy policymakers that will provide you with a statewide perspective on these developments. And so I'd like to kick things off by introducing Kelly Trumbull, who is a energy staff researcher at the UCLA Luskin Center for Innovation. Kelly?
Thank you, JR. So as JR mentioned, I'm going to be presenting on some of our recent research. You can find this report on our website now on CCAs. And I'm Kelly Trumbull. I'm a project manager at the Luskin Center, and I focus on energy, climate, and water. For those of you who don't know, CCAs, or community choice aggregators, are a type of electricity provider that gives cities and counties local control over their electricity decisions. So CCA creation and operation decisions are made by locally elected officials, usually at the city and the county level. When a CCA launches in an investor-owned utility territory, all of the customers in that territory are automatically enrolled into the CCA. That's per the enabling legislation. CCA's role is to purchase electricity for their customers, while the investor-owned utilities, or IOUs, continue to provide electricity transmission, distribution, and other services. And this table kind of summarizes, at a high level, the division of the roles between CCAs and IOUs. CCAs have grown rapidly in California over the last decade. The graph on the left shows the increase in the megawatt hours and load that CCAs have served. More than 30% of the state's population currently has a CCA option, and that has grown from less than 1% in 2010. 182 cities and counties across the state are a member of 23 CCAs. And we're going to pause to do a quick audience poll. Do you get your electricity from a CCA? And I'll give everyone a minute to respond yes, no, or if you're unsure. And so our results, 33% currently get their electricity from a CCA, a little bit over half don't, and about 13% are unsure. And if you're unsure, here is a list of all the cities and counties in California that are currently members of a CCA. Cities on the left, counties on the right, and it's in alphabetical order. So as I mentioned before, CCAs are able to choose the type of electricity to provide their customers with. And in California, CCAs have typically chosen to offer more renewable energy than is required by the state and more renewable energy than their incumbent IOU. CCAs can also, but aren't required to, offer their customers multiple electricity products to choose among. For example, we have East Bay Community Energy here and their 3 electricity products. The one on the left, Bright Choice, has about 40% renewable energy and for a total of 60% carbon-free energy. And when I talk about renewable energy, I'm referring to what the state classifies as renewable energy, and that includes solar, wind, geothermal, biomass, and a few others. And carbon-free electricity includes large hydroelectric generation and nuclear generation, which isn't technically renewable, but doesn't emit greenhouse gas emissions when it generates electricity. And other energy includes natural gas and unspecified power. East Bay also offers a middle option called the Brilliant 100, which is about 40% renewable energy and a total of 100% carbon-free. And they also have a 100% renewable energy product. One tool at CCA's disposal that is particularly powerful is that they are able to choose which product is the default product for all of their residents and businesses. 14 CCA member communities currently choose 100% renewable energy as the default for all of their customers. Additionally, over 2/3 of CCA member communities have a default electricity product with more than 90% carbon-free energy, and that represents a population of about 6 million people. So this has contributed to CCAs helping the state to exceed their renewable energy targets. This is what we're calling their direct effect. The state has a renewable energy requirement called the Renewables Portfolio Standard. There's currently an interim target of 33% renewable energy by 2020, last year. And Senate Bill 100 passed in 2018 set a 100% carbon-free electricity target by 2045. From 2011 to 2019, our report finds that CCAs purchased 23.5 million megawatt hours of renewable energy in excess of state requirements. That's twice as much as they were required to purchase. And this is a result of elected officials choosing higher renewable energy content for their community in response to their customers' preferences for clean energy. And we think this is great for the environment. Surpassing these milestones, these renewable energy target milestones early, significantly helps us to accelerate the reductions in the total amount of greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere. One aspect of CCAs that's kind of gone underappreciated is their indirect effect on investor-owned utilities also exceeding their targets. So before CCAs had emerged, incumbent IOUs had purchased long-term renewable energy contracts on behalf of all of their customers, some of whom have since departed for CCAs. So as these IOUs lost customers to their CCAs, they had the same amount of renewable energy, but fewer customers. So their per customer share of renewable energy has increased. We estimate that investor-owned utilities overcomplied by 22.5 million megawatt hours from 2011 to 2019, indirectly attributable to the emergence of CCAs. I'm going to walk you through how we arrived at that number in the next graph. So this graph shows the amount of renewable energy that IOUs are required to purchase. You can see it kind of jumps up in 2015. That's because there was an increase in the interim target to 25%. And you can see that line start to decrease. So their requirements are decreasing because they're losing all those customers to CCAs. We estimate a scenario in which, a counterfactual scenario in which CCAs didn't emerge and what IOUs requirements would have been without CCAs. And basically we just add the CCA load in back to the IOU load and assume all those customers would have been served by the CCA, or by the IOU, I'm sorry. And that difference in requirements is what we attribute to CCAs. That's the indirect effect of CCAs and IOU overcompliance. Finally, we have here, this is how much renewable energies IOUs actually purchased from 2011 to 2019, this orange line. And one thing I'd like to draw your attention to that I'll mention again later is you can see that IOUs have started to decrease the amount of renewable energy in their portfolios, bringing them closer to what is actually required of them. In this graph, I'll walk you through, it basically summarizes what I've been saying, the combined direct and indirect effect of CCAs on renewable energy and exceeding these state targets. This bottom chunk shows the amount of renewable energy CCAs have purchased. This piece here is what CCAs were required to purchase. And this is what they purchased in excess of their requirements. This piece here shows the amount of renewable energy IOUs purchased. And this is the amount we're indirectly attributing to CCAs. And so CCAs combined total direct and indirect effect on exceeding targets is this middle dash piece here. So in conclusion, we find that CCAs have contributed directly and indirectly to exceeding state renewable energy targets by a combined 46 million megawatt hours. By achieving these renewable energy targets more quickly, the state benefits from a cumulatively larger reduction in greenhouse gas emissions each year. However, as I noted in that graph, we are starting to see some evidence that investor-owned utilities will reduce their current per customer renewable energy holdings, bringing them closer to the state requirements. And we propose that one potential solution to this could be to accelerate renewable energy requirements. This has been done before. For example, in 2030, the target used to be 50%. The most recent piece of renewables portfolio legislation accelerated that to 60%. So we could continue to accelerate our renewable energy targets, make them more aggressive to kind of lock in these early gains that we've seen in exceeding the renewable energy targets. Thank you. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me or JR at those addresses. And with that, I'll turn it over to Beth for her presentation.
And thank you, Kelly, for that. And let me just introduce Beth Vaughn, who is the Executive Director of Cal CCA and was the founding director since 2017. Beth, thank you so much for joining us today.
Great, thank you. Yeah, first up, thank you so much to JR and his team here at the UCLA Luskin Center for holding this webinar and for inviting California Community Choice Association to come along and present and set the stage for the panel that you'll be hearing from shortly. So I'm just going to pick up where Kelly left off. That was an excellent overview, excellent presentation. What I want to do is just to dive into a little bit more detail around what exactly the CCAs have been doing in the last year regarding the procurement of clean energy projects. And I'm using the term clean energy because a lot of what Kelly was talking about was the renewable statistics. And as she mentioned, we have certain goals under the RPS, but certainly in the past couple of years, past 18 months, and in particularly the events in August with the extreme heat storm that we had and the rolling blackouts, there's been a real focus on reliability. And so the CCAs here in California are not just looking at wind and solar, but are looking at other sorts of diversity of resources in their portfolios. So just really quickly, an update in case I noticed we have a lot of folks from out of state who are participating on the webinar. This is a very, very busy map that we have at Cal CCA. It's on our website on the impact page, and there's a lot of detail in here, but essentially if you take a step back, everywhere you see in green is where we have community choice aggregators serving load to the customers. Currently, there's 22 CCAs who are operational. We have on the right-hand side there a timeline with Marin Clean Energy first launching in 2010. And then you see a number of CCAs launched in 2020. And I'll mention 2021 in a moment, but I also want to direct your attention to the colors on the map there where you see orange is where implementation plans were filed by the end of 2020 in order for those communities to launch CCAs in 2022. So there is a lead time that's required in order to prepare for a launch. Yeah, there we go. So just in terms of what is coming up, we have a number of new CCAs. We have a lot of more detailed trackers on this, but you see there are some new CCAs, particularly down in the San Diego area, both San Diego Community Power and Clean Energy Alliance. Collectively, once they've rolled out all of their phases over several years, it will be more than 50% of the load that San Diego Gas and Electric is serving at the moment. Also, there are several expansions. So those are existing CCAs that expand and include more cities and counties in the CCA that they're currently serving. And on the panel today, we have Tom Habashi from Central Coast Community Energy. His CCA has grown so much that he had to change their name last year. So Tom can tell you more about that. And then this just adds a little color to one of the graphs that I noticed Kelly had, which is this growth and anticipated expansion. Again, sometimes I'm not so concerned about the number of CCAs. I know that's important to people like Ed Randolph, who's on the panel from the Public Utilities Commission, because he's looking and concerned at, how do all these load serving entities interact in the marketplace. One of the things I'm looking at is specifically this load growth. And in this diagram here, the orange line actually is the CCA load as a percent of the 2020 jurisdictional load of the IOUs. So in 2022, we're predicting that the load of the CCAs will be just under 35% of what the investor-owned utility jurisdictional load could be. Okay, but what I really am here to talk to you about more is to give you an update on what the CCAs have been doing in terms of signing long-term contracts for new build. So this is new build clean energy projects. That's something here in California has been a real focus in the state. It's something that the Integrated Resource Plan looks at as we look 10 years out in terms of what is the incremental resources supply that's going to be needed to serve the load in California. And every November for the past 3 years, Cal CCA has provided a snapshot of the progress CCAs are making in securing new build clean energy resources through long-term power purchase agreements. And you see in the tile there in the bottom right, long-term is defined as 10 to 25 years. We have some compliance obligations around securing long-term contracts within a certain period. So in November of 2020, we came out with this announcement a couple of months ago. It showed that CCAs have added in a single year a record-setting amount of clean energy to their portfolios while bringing more diverse resources to the mix. And that's how I introduce this. It's really important, the diversity. To date, they've signed long-term power purchase agreements for more than 6,000 megawatts with new build in solar, wind, biogas, energy storage, and for the first time, geothermal energy. And you see on the tile, the brown tile there, we've highlighted the 14 megawatts of geothermal. That's the first new geothermal plant in the CAISO balancing area in 30 years. And again, have your questions ready for Tom Habashi because he is part of that joint procurement. This total is concludes 5,000 megawatts in executable renewable energy PPAs, which is an increase of 1,700 megawatts over the past year, and more than 1,000 megawatts in battery energy storage contracts, which is a fourfold increase. In other words, we quadrupled the amount of megawatts over 2019. The other thing in our announcement in November, and again, all of these materials are available on our website, is we also included this spreadsheet of the 117 contracts that were signed by CCAs, as well as and that's just a snippet of that you see there on the screen, as well as on the right-hand side, we update our map that shows the project locations by county. So we were up, as I mentioned, 117 contracts, over 76 contracts in November of 2019, and they range, they're located in 21 California counties, all the way from up in Humboldt, down to Humboldt County, down to Riverside County in the south, as well as in the states of Arizona, New Mexico, and Nevada. So just another way to look at this is, what are the online dates? So it's one thing to execute these power purchase agreements, but in terms of the online dates, you can see here what we expect the 6,000 megawatts to be online before, cumulatively online before 2023. And what I'm really trying to show here on this slide, which is very small on my screen, let me see if I can pull it up bigger, is is the diversity that I was mentioning. So the bright orange at the bottom of the graph is the standalone solar. And to my point, what we're seeing more and more as we track the CCA's purchases is the combination of solar plus storage. And so that it's kind of hard to see here, but in order to do the accounting and not to count things twice, we have categories there of hybridized storage, which is the amount of total energy storage that's paired with solar. And then another area there called hybridized solar, which is the amount of solar that's paired with energy storage. I know it's a little complicated, but again, we explain it in more detail on our website. One thing I want to mention is the offshore wind, and that's the green. Well, wind is there, the green at the top. But I wanted to mention that the CCAs are very interested, as is the state of California, in offshore wind. There are some proposals out there. And in fact, Redwood Coast Energy Authority and some of our partners, the developing partners, will be hosting a webinar in February, on February 26th, I believe, where we'll be going into those sorts of details. And again, you can access that on our webinar, on our website. Okay, and then quickly, I just want to mention two more things and then hand over the mic back to JR. And that is two exciting activities that are going on with our CCAs just in this past year. And one here on the screen is long duration storage. So in California, we've been having a very intense discussion over the last couple of years, particularly up in the legislature, around the integration of renewables onto the grid. And this goes back to my point about reliability. And so one of the things that we've been looking at is long duration storage. Battery storage, we're often looking at 4-hour periods of discharge. So the definition around long duration storage, and there's a lot of different definitions out there, but it's got to be at least 8 hours, if not more. A group of CCAs, and you see them listed there, there's, well, actually 13 CCAs got together and this past summer put out a request for information to find out more regarding the potential of long duration storage and the different technologies. They received a lot of information over the summer. Based upon that analysis, in October, they went out with a request for offers, this RFO, 8 of these CCAs. Bids were due in December, and they've been going through an evaluation process. And let me just go to the next slide. I do have here the goals of the RFO. And as I mentioned, it's a grid charge with a minimum of 8-hour discharge duration. And the online date is to be no later than June 2026. And from a timeline perspective, they're hoping to execute agreements in the third quarter of 2021. There's some links here, and again, this presentation will be posted on UCLA Luskin Center's website, and you can access those links for the press release. Last but not least, and I swear it's my last slide, is the fact that a group of CCAs, and there's 9 of them here, have been collectively working towards creating what we call the Super Joint Powers Authority. So this JPA would be called the California Community Power, CC Power. There you go. Collectively, the projected load of this group is more than 35,000 gigawatt hours. So the previous slide I didn't point out to you was over 60,000 gigawatt hours. So this is more than half of the CCA load collectively. And I'll also point out that that's greater than San Diego Gas and Electric's current load. It includes almost 3 million customer accounts. To date, 7 CCAs have gotten approval from their boards to join the Super JPA, and 5 of those CCAs have an investment grade credit rating. And the first project that they're looking at is this long duration energy storage. So these are really exciting developments. JR, we could do a whole nother webinar on the really cool programs that CCAs are doing, but that's the update from me in terms of the procurement the CCAs are doing around clean energy projects. Hand it back to you.
Thank you so much, Beth. That was terrific. And now we'll turn to our first panelist, Angelina Galiteva. Ms. Galiteva is currently president of Neo Options, a renewable energy and new technology product design company. But she's here today really sharing her perspective and purview as the chair of the California Independent System Operator, which is responsible for essentially managing the larger grid. And we're very grateful, Angelina, to have you with us. And we look forward to helping you, having you put these trends in the context of how California's grid and energy ecosystem needs to begin to adapt to this larger and larger amount of renewable energy. Thank you for being with us.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here. And thank you to Kelly and Beth for the great overview. Among my many hats that I wear, I'm also the founder of Renewables 100 Policy Institute, which is an institute dedicated to the 100% accelerating the transition to 100% renewable energy. So, of course, that is very near and dear to my heart. And it's always good to see the CCAs making progress in transitioning to more and more renewables on the grid. Now we need to ensure that we can reliably operate the grid every single hour of every single day, 365 days a year, and that we're all good grid citizens as our projects join the grid. So, of course, California's energy industry is in the midst of unprecedented change. Beth, of course, mentioned that we have the fires, but we've also got the ones through cooling plants that are being shut down. We've got CCAs coming in as load-serving entities. We've got behind-the-meter energy and the goals that we have to reach with a 100% renewable energy goal if squarely on the horizon. We're very lucky in California, which is the 5th largest economy in the world, to have a comprehensive set of laws that we have to follow in terms of reaching that 100% renewable energy goal. We've got aggressive renewable energy targets where we have to meet 100% clean energy by 2045. We've got a deep greenhouse gas reduction program with specific goals that technically, if we reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 80% below 1990 levels by 2050, it means that California's whole economy is completely decarbonized. Not just the energy sector, but transportation, buildings, fuels as well. Talking about transportation, that's 41% of our greenhouse gas emissions. So the accelerated decarbonization of the transportation sector, which of course puts an additional burden on the electricity sector, is going to be very critical. And we know that we've got an executive order that says no sale of internal combustion engines after 2035, making our lives even more exciting. Distributed energy, of course, is very important. Behind the meter energy and aggregation is also coming to the forefront. So with all of that, making sure that we can operate the grid reliably, especially during the critical hours, is more and more important. We've reached high percentages of renewable energy penetration where we've operated the grid on over 80% of pure renewable energy, sun, wind, and water, and over 90% carbon-free, but we need to ensure that we can do that every single hour of every day. And unfortunately, that's not the case yet. It is something that we all need to work together to reach. Our leadership role in the transportation sector, which is key, of course, remains. Over 90% of total U.S. investment in clean transportation is in California. Now, focusing on the California ISO, I'm very proud to say that we're one of the leaders of a decarbonized grid. We operate a system that peaks with loads that are about 50,000 megawatts in the summer. And we take great pride in being one of the global leaders in renewable resource integration. To reach the goals of 2045, we're looking at needing to add 8,500 megawatts of new wind. So certainly offshore wind is very exciting, and I'm glad that Beth focused on that as well. That's a diverse resource that also coincides with the peaks very nicely and can balance solar resources that, of course, are intermittent. Very reliable, very predictable, but not available 24/7. 75,000 megawatts of new solar resources, 25,000 megawatts of new behind-the-meter solar, and 55,000 megawatts of new storage will be necessary. Here's the challenges of operating a predominantly renewable grid that is also very solar heavy. This is an example of a day, April 29 in 2019, where we were over-generating, we were curtailing renewable energy, and we were also exporting. We really don't want to be in such a situation. We need more sinks for over-generation and being able to more gradually distribute the energy throughout the day without having the end of the day peak. Unfortunately, what we're looking at, the build out through 2030, if we were to meet our goals, and especially if we accelerate them, as was mentioned, that would be an option, and of course I'm all for it, is a 60% growth of solar resources. We need more diversity in resources, so that geothermal, that biofuels, and the the hydro and any other resource like wind would be very helpful. So this is the current and projected renewable generation capacity in operation in the ISO. This is what we're looking the last bar for 2030. And of course, again, very solar heavy. Wind and geothermal are there, but they're not as big as we'd like to see them. And more hydro and biofuels will certainly be helpful as well. Storage as well. There are a lot of technologies for storage, and storage is critical in terms of any renewable resource being a good grid citizen or being able to dispatch the grid well. We have compressed air, we have flywheels, we have rail gravity, molten salt, pump storage, and battery storage. And what we're looking at in terms of the ISOQ is mostly battery storage. And again, like Beth mentioned, it's about 50% divided between standalone and combined with solar only. So what we are seeing is the standalone storage projects and the solar and storage hybrid projects, which is good, but we need a whole lot more storage to be able to reliably operate the grid. Another issue with storage and with batteries that we noted in operating, especially during high stress periods, is how batteries operate currently in the market. The planning models that we had for storage resource assumed arbitrage of intraday energy prices, where storage would be charging during the peak of solar generation and discharging during the end of the day or the beginning of the day where we don't have enough solar still on the grid. However, that's not necessarily the case. We find that storage resources are providing mostly ancillary services and not energy to the market. And maybe we need to look at our regulatory structures and figure out what's going on and what are the incentives to where storage may not be dispatching and be as reliable as we need it to be at the end of the day so we can rely on it as a resource. So one of the solutions for that is the ISO is developing a minimum charge requirement to ensure sufficient energy in the day-ahead market from storage. And hopefully that will send the right signals and we'll be able to work together towards a structure that incentivizes more storage to be available at the end of the day where we need it for those last 4 hours. Batteries in the wholesale market, of course, deliver value in different timescales, and that is extremely valuable to the grid. They can shave the peak, they can provide ancillary services, they can provide energy and other resources. We also are very keen in looking what other economies are doing, so whether it's Germany or Argentina, and how they're going to be dispatching storage and decarbonizing their economies. While we are very focused on batteries and battery technologies for our storage and longer term storage, Europe and some of the other countries are looking more towards hydrogen and utilizing the gas infrastructure. We'll certainly be learning from each other along the way, but storage is needed, and long-term storage is needed to operate the reliable grid that's mostly renewable. So we've got to think about that, and we've got to think collectively about what are the resources that we need, whether it's pumped hydro, like gravitational storage, whether it's batteries with electric storage, and all of them fit a niche, or whether it's using fuels with hydrogen and others to decarbonize another grid as well. So the ISO supports California's clean energy goals while maintaining reliability. That is extremely critical. As I mentioned, the 33% RPS has been achieved, and we've also operated the grid with 78% by renewable energy, 98.7% carbon-free. That's almost 100% carbon-free. It can be done. The issue, though, is doing it 24/7 and making sure that we can operate every single hour of every single day. And I cannot stress this enough, because there's a few critical hours at the end of the day that are extremely important. So we've had the summer 2020 issues, and there was a preliminary root cause analysis. There's a final root cause analysis right now, which identified a few issues that I'll go over very quickly. So with the existing resource planning processes, are not designed to fully address extreme heat storms. We had a heat storm of 1 in 35 years that occurred last summer. However, the load issue that we had was 1 in 10 years. So we're on the right track. We just need to fine tune and make sure that we can actually ride through these events better than we have and better than we did last summer. Again, as I mentioned, we need to have the ability to meet the net peak in the evening hours especially, and ensure that there's adequate supply every hour of every day. That means sufficient resource adequacy for all of these areas. Gas imports. We're still relying a lot on gas, and we're relying on gas to ramp up the system at the end of the day. And as you can see, the solar going down of about 8,000 megawatts means the ramp up of gas of about 4,000 megawatts or more every single day at the end of the day. The critical time frame and the critical period we need to be focusing on every day is between 4 and 9 p.m. into the evenings. This is the system that we're operating right now. It is still pretty gas heavy, and we need to decarbonize the gas resources to the extent possible. Again, the critical time frame at the end of the day is when solar goes down and we're ramping up, we're utilizing gas. Some of it is not under contract. So that is going to exacerbate issues starting in 2020, as we saw, where we had a shortage of 23,000 megawatts. 2021 and 2022 are also showcasing that we may have shortages during these very high peak days if we have them again. So we need to work together to ensure that we have those resources, that we have them under contract, that we have them available, that they're throughout the system. Whether it's the CCAs or anywhere else, storage, of course, is going to help, and several thousand megawatts of battery storage coming online is certainly going to be something we can look at. So the capacity shortfall in 2020 and meeting those summer evening peak loads, of course, are important. And we need to add automated demand response, which is also important, and rely on DER, increase energy efficiency, diversify the fleet for evening peaks. So geothermal, hydro, and any other renewable resource that's not solar dependent will also be helping quite as well. Ramping needs. At the end of the day, when the solar goes down and utilization of energy because the lights start coming on and people are at home is usually about 15,000 megawatts. For that lasting about 3 to 4 hours every single day. That is a problem that's only going to get exacerbated if we add only solar resources, both in front and behind the meter, because by 2030, that ramp is going to be 25,000 megawatts for 3 or 4 hours every day. So we need to be able to ensure that all of our technologies that are coming on to manage that quick ramp up are able to meet that quick acceleration and then last for that 3 or 4 hours. So the ramping needs that need to happen is certainly Western energy integration in the market can help. That we need to ensure that the inverter-based technologies are able to handle the ramps as well, and how we decarbonize all of the resources and what we can bring in to be able to meet that peak from a technological basis is going to be very important. So both long and short-term and medium-term duration storage is necessary. Time of use rates to discourage that use of too much energy at the end of the day, of course. And then looking towards the electric vehicle integration, ensuring that electric vehicles are integrated in such a way as to minimize the ramp and not to exacerbate it. The other challenge that is a very interesting challenge that focuses mostly on long-term duration storage is multi-days of no sunshine and no wind. So low renewable energy production can and does happen, and we've seen it occur to where if you have low solar insolation and low wind, the ability to recharge the batteries is limited, making the operation of the system much more gas reliant. So if we're going to be shutting down once through cooling plants and we're going to be decarbonizing the gas fleet, we need to be aware of what resources are going to come in those multi-days of low solar, low wind generation, and what we're going to be replacing those resources with. Because as you can see, the amount of gas that's necessary to come in and start making up the shortfall in those days is pretty large. So decarbonizing the gas fleet is going to be something that all of us collectively, again, need to focus on and ensure that we're able to incorporate into our planning. So a diversity of resources, of course, is important, and a diversity of operation and visibility, not only on a geographic level, but also on a very vertical level, all the way to the individual customer, and being able to have visibility in those systems and rely on resources both in front and behind the meter for demand energy response is going to be very critical. The Western energy market, I'll go very quickly. We launched it in 2014. It's been pretty successful. It's a voluntary market that the ISO launched. It now covers over 82% of the Western grid, West-wide grid, which is pretty phenomenal in terms of the benefits that this market has showed that it can deliver. And the benefits are not only environmental, because there's more renewable energy output and there's less greenhouse gas emissions West-wide, but because there's also an over $1 billion economic benefit coming to customers that participate in this market, most of it in California, which is pretty great. So we're living through an unprecedented change. The energy industry is the most exciting of all. It's a low carbon circle, and the future is digitized, decentralized, decarbonized, diversified, and very democratized. Everybody is welcome, but you have to be a good grid citizen because we have to decarbonize, and we've got to get to 100% renewable energy in a reliable way. If we have a hiccup in reliability, it will set all of us back for years and if not decades. And I always like to remind myself as what are we doing this ultimately for? We do not have a planet B, and we need to have enough plan Bs to ensure that 100% is the reality, faster rather than slower, and we can get there in a reliable and resilient way as we improve the earth and provide a better future for all of us, our kids, because we owe it to them. So thank you very much, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Angelina, for that tsunami of information and considerations as we anticipate further renewable energy growth and adapting to become good grid citizens. Thank you for that. So we just heard the perspective of the grid operator. Connected to the ends of all of those distribution lines are customers, and those customers are served by, in the state of California, primarily investor-owned utilities. And the primary responsibility for regulating the investments and conduct of those investor-owned utilities is the California Public Utilities Commission. And so it is my great pleasure today to introduce to you Edward Randolph, who is the Deputy Executive Director for Energy and Climate Policy at the California Public Utilities Commission, who is going to share with us the challenges that these trends, the opportunities and challenges that these trends present to both the investor-owned utilities and also the California Public Utilities Commission. Ed, thank you for making time to be with us today.
Yeah, thanks, JR. You've given me about 3 minutes, so I'm not going to be able to incorporate all of the challenges and trends that are out there that are created. I do want to focus on kind of one of the biggest issues we face now. And to back it up, thank you to Angelina for that wonderful presentation. I don't know how you got through all of that quickly. There's a lot of information in there, but it really does emphasize the point that the electric grid is one of the most complicated and largest machines in the world. And given the size and the complexity of that, is also an incredibly fragile system that most people don't think about very often. You go home, you turn on your light switch, you turn on your electric stove or your space heater or whatever it may be, and it works, and you don't think about it. However, the utilities jobs, the CAISO's job, and indirectly the PUC's job is to make sure that fragile system actually works so that you can do that. And that means it needs to not only have enough energy to meet peak demand, but you need to not have too much energy on the grid when you aren't at peak demand, and you need to stay within certain voltage ranges or certain frequency ranges. And if any of that goes wrong, the entire grid can collapse, and you see cascading outages like we saw in San Diego back in 2011, or we can remember back to ones on the East Coast prior to that. So it is an incredibly complicated process to balance all that. It used to be easier when across the country you had a series of vertically integrated utilities, a utility that was responsible for going out and providing and buying the electricity for its customers, for managing the transmission grid and for managing the distribution grid. And that utility could do long-term planning and say 10, 15 years out, I know what my customer base is going to be. I can start making that planning. As we've moved in California to community choice aggregation, and there's a push to expand on what are called energy service providers that we are providing, we've moved away from that system very dramatically, from a system where we had, more than 3, but from the PUC's perspective, we had 5 electric providers in California, 3 large utilities, actually it's 6, and 3 smaller ones that were largely vertically integrated, that were easy for them to understand, or easier for them to understand what their needs are, and easier for the PUC, which has a constitutional and statutory obligation to make sure that all of this works from a regulatory standpoint to manage that. Now with this growth, JR started out in saying, it's largely, most customers in California are largely served by the investor-owned utilities. That is becoming less and less true by the year, and pretty soon will not be true anymore. And most customers will be served by something other than an investor-owned utility. However, those other entities, the community choice aggregators, the energy service providers, and the IOUs, still need to know what their customer base is going to be over time. And then they still have an obligation to go out and buy enough energy to meet their customers' demands. And that's one of the key things the PUC is working on now, is what are called resource adequacy rules. And the rules to make sure that that everybody out there buys enough electricity to meet their demands. The challenge we face is, as I've said, this was all built around a different paradigm, a different business model for providing electricity service. And as we move into this new paradigm with a lot more moving parts, not only a lot more moving parts as it relates to who is providing the electricity, but a lot more moving parts on our sources of electricity. Instead of having 1 or 2 big nuclear plants, a lot of natural gas plants, and some out-of-state coal plants, we are thankfully moving to something where we have lots and lots of solar, lots and lots of wind, adding storage into the system to help integrate that out. Those type of resources. But as we've noted, each one of those resources, unlike that nuclear plant, unlike that gas plant, they can't stay on 24/7. The wind goes away, the solar goes away. The storage we're talking about these days, we're going from 200 megawatts of installed storage in California last year to 2,400 megawatts of installed storage in California in 2021. All of that storage, almost all of that storage, can provide energy for 4 hours. That's not the same as a gas plant. That storage needs to charge. So it becomes what we call a use-limited resource, the same as the solar and the wind, that all of these parts need to work together in a coordinated way that's very different than it used to be. Just to emphasize that charging for a second, it needs to charge. People think there's excess power to charge every day. If you look at the heat storms we had this last summer, we may not have been able to charge all those batteries in the middle of the day because of high demand for the solar in the middle of the day. So then those batteries are actually charging off of natural gas, which means we're running natural gas plants at night when they otherwise would have been turned off. So there are a lot of complications out there. And I just kind of wanted to lay that out there as what our challenge is, but it's also the challenge to the CCAs because they have to meet these rules. They're largely new entrants to this market. They have to go out and sign long-term contracts for these resources to meet the obligations out there. I think a lot of them early on struggled to get a diverse resource mix. As Beth has talked about, they're getting more and more sophisticated in understanding what their long-term needs are, what their obligation to the grid is, and are getting a more and more diverse resource mix out there to support it. And that's very good news and makes my job much easier. And I just want to close on a bit of good news that's sometimes lost when we start talking about why can't California move faster on X or Y for clean energy, which we absolutely need to for a bunch of reasons. But let's not forget also that looking at the resource mix of the electricity sector in California today, publicly owned utilities like LADBP, investor-owned utilities like Southern California Edison, the CCAs like CPA, the Clean Power Alliance, combined, California's resource mix from all of those is 63 to 65% carbon free today. And that actually does not include behind the meter solar. That for different reasons, reasons that are hard to explain, that doesn't get calculated into that. You add the behind the meter solar, we're actually over 70% carbon free already. So setting these goals to get to 90% or 100% carbon free, they are achievable. The hard part's going to get from 90 to 100%, but they are achievable. And quite frankly, where we are now, my own opinion is getting to 90% is fairly achievable in very cost-effective ways. And there's plenty of studies out there now to back that up. And I'll close on that. I think I went a little longer than I should have.
No, that was terrific, Ed. Really, really appreciate you being here and sharing that perspective with us. I think really enriches the conversation, our understanding of the challenge and the opportunity. I'd like to then turn to our last panelist today before we open it up to audience Q&A, of which we seem to have almost 60 to 80 questions already. But it's my pleasure to introduce Tom Habashi, who is the CEO of Monterey Bay Community Power. Tom was previously the CEO of Silicon Valley Clean Energy. He has decades of experience running community utilities. Tom, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you very much, JR. And thanks everybody for being our audience and being so patient to finally hear from one of the ones that are running the CCA. Our name, by the way, now is Central Coast Community Energy. Initially, we started as Monterey Bay Community Power. The agency was formed from 3 different counties: Santa Cruz, San Benito, and Monterey County, with 16 cities incorporated within those 3 counties. We started operation in 2018. In 2020, we added 2 new cities, the city of San Luis Obispo as well as the city of Morro Bay. Both of them are in San Luis Obispo County. Starting January of this year, we started serving the county of Santa Barbara, representing the unincorporated areas of that county, as well as 8 cities, 1 from Monterey, 4 from San Luis Obispo, and 3 from Santa Barbara. In October of this year, we will be expanding to serve 2 more cities from Santa Barbara. And in 2020, we're bringing in the last city from Santa Barbara, which pretty much gets us to be serving 33 different jurisdictions of the 37 jurisdictions in the 5 counties, from Santa Cruz all the way to Santa Barbara. This is about 300 miles of a long service area, maybe about 40 to 50 miles wide. In total, roughly about 8,000 square miles of service area, about 1.25 million people. roughly about 450,000 customers. Now, we've been in operation only for a couple of years, maybe 2.5 years. However, we understand clearly what's required of us and why we were formed, and that's to bring in renewable resources and to accelerate the deployment of these resources here in California and elsewhere. Our primary goal is reduction of greenhouse gas, and to do that at a cost-effective manner while we are promoting economic development here in our service area. So far, in the last 2 years, we have contracted for 73 megawatts of geothermal capacity, 150 megawatts of solar, another combined hybrid of solar and storage of 380 megawatt of solar resources, and 120 megawatts of storage. Most of it is 4 hours. We also signed up for 60 megawatt of standalone solar with one of the existing, standalone storage that would be coupled with one of the existing solar power plants that are serving Pacific Gas and Electric, and I believe one industrial customer, I think it's Apple, that's operating here in the Bay Area. As Beth mentioned, we are participating with CC Power on bringing in long duration storage. And I can't emphasize enough that this has been from day one my call, whether it was with Silicon Valley Clean Energy or here at Central Coast, that we need to focus on storage, and we will not sign for solar contracts unless we have storage to go with it. And we are now calling for and pushing for as hard as we possibly can to get some storage capacity or get some incentives, tax incentives to allow for the building of storage capacity of all types in California and elsewhere. It is the only way we're going to be able to truly get to 100% carbon free or 100% renewable resources. I want to mention just very quickly a story before I start talking about some of the opportunities and some of the risks that we're facing. When we started, sometimes in the year 2010, I was having this discussion, quick chat with somebody high official at the California ISO. And at that time, the really CCAs were non-existent, except for the effort that Marin was mounting in order to start their CCA. I've asked him what is the deal with the CCAs, and his response was, "Give it no mind. The CCAs are just at this point is a nuisance, and it's coming from just one county in California, and the likelihood of their survival is very, very slim." Somewhere around the year 2015, 2016, when I started working for Silicon Valley Clean Energy, the definition changed a little bit, and we've managed to graduate from nuisance to disruptors. And I think that's the term that was often used by some of the IAUs, actually some of the folks in the CPUC, as well as a couple of folks from that work for CCAs. A term that I quite frankly did not like, and now we are seen as a load-serving entity, and I'm going to dare to say that we are really now beyond just a load-serving entity and leading the state of California into a future of renewable resources, because that's the only thing we contract for. Whether 3CE or any of the other CCAs, we pretty much doing 100% contracting for renewable resources. And I think we're going to need considerably a lot more storage, because we do have a policy, by the way, at 3CE to reach 100% renewable resources with long-term contracts by the year 2030, and to do monthly balancing also by the year 2030. That's a tall order, and it does require that we're going to spend some money on storage, which gets me to talking about opportunities and risks. Certainly, we are blessed to start this late in the game, so we're not saddled with old power plants and old regulatory schemes that pretty much hamper us from being as creative as we can. But we also facing certain risks, and one, quite frankly, is trying to constantly deal with the changes in the regulatory scheme that makes it very difficult for us to try to plan appropriately and to plan for the long term. We are in flux where I think both the investor-owned utilities as well as the CPUC really having a tough time trying to get their arms around what's going on and to put together some reasonable plan for the long term that will help everybody move forward and do it economically and with clear vision of what they're trying to achieve. I know what we are trying to achieve here at 3CE, and that is a future free of the burning of fossil fuel in order to generate energy. Not only that, we are moving now with supporting a lot of programs on the electrification side, because we recognize that it's not just the generation of electricity that keeps our air dirty, but also the transportation industry, the building industry. There's plenty of CO2 and other emissions that come from that, and we are doing our best on the program side in order to electrify everything, because I think that's where we need to be in the future if we really want to deal with climate change. And with that, I will conclude my remarks, and I'll turn it back to you, JR.
Thank you so much, Tom. Really appreciate that. Thank you to all three of our panelists. One common question that we have gotten in the chat box is, will the slides be available? And we will absolutely send you, all of our registered participants, copies of all three sets of slides. And this webinar also will be recorded. And I just want to echo something that Ed Randolph said from the CPUC, which is that California today is 63 to 65% carbon free. And that is an accomplishment that we have made collectively as a state, all working together, with the CCAs being a really important force in driving that forward, but also our state's aggressive renewable portfolio goals and the CPUC's commitment to advancing those goals and surpassing them when possible. So I'd like to turn the podium, so to speak, over to Kelly Trumbull, who will handle the audience Q&A for the remaining 15 minutes. Thank you all. Kelly?
Thank you, JR. If anyone in the audience has any questions, feel free to submit it to the Q&A. We have quite a number. We'll try to get through as many as possible. But I think we'll start with one that came up a few times. I think maybe Tom might be best to answer this one, is what is the most effective way for customers to request to be part of a CCA, and how can customers advocate to their local municipalities to form or join a CCA?
The only way for customers really to be part of a CCA is to convince the leaders of their community, whether that to be the county supervisors or cities or city council members of a city, to join a CCA, or to adopt an ordinance that basically say we would like to join whichever CCA that is offering for them to join. That is the most effective way. There's not a customer by themselves without the approval, the consent approval of their city or their county. They cannot, unfortunately, they cannot join a CCA. They really need to go through their city first. and get that city to approve joining a CCA, and that's how they get there.
Thank you, Tom.
Can I add to that?
Sure,
real quick? Just really quick. The most effective way to do that is to pay attention to your local politics and vote local. And I don't mean that facetiously, but far too often people get so enamored with, or not enamored, it's the wrong word, but focus so much of their attention on congressional races and U.S. Senate races and president, and that's all very important. But then when you ask them who their city council member is or who their state legislator is, they couldn't tell you. They couldn't tell you what the politics are. And so much of your day-to-day lives are impacted way more by those local officials than by those federal officials. And you can see that today. You can see what President Biden is announcing today on clean energy. It's great news, but it is pales into comparison to what California has been doing or other states have been doing over the last 10 years out there. So it really matters who your local officials are on how you move the ball forward, especially on clean energy.
Thank you, Ed and Tom. The next question is more general. What are some of the short-term solutions for electricity providers like CCAs and IOUs to help improve climate resiliency and reliability?
I didn't get the last part of that question, Kelly.
Sure, yeah. It's someone is wondering what are some short-term solutions that electricity providers can enact that can help improve climate resiliency and reliability in the short term?
I can jump in. One of the things that we are doing, one of the programs that we are adopting is to get batteries to a lot of the customers that we have, especially the ones on medical assistant. Definitely finding areas that most likely could be cut off in case of fire or any problems, and support the installation and putting in a micro generation that will help that area get power and become more resilient and sort of given the proof that they need, that they can actually get the electricity even without having the connection necessary to do so.
And Tom, I'll chime in, Beth here. I answered a similar question in the chat, and I added a link there to a document on the CalCCA website, which we just updated in December. It's entitled CCA Resilience Initiatives. So our communications director, Leora Vestal, tracks through our marketing committee that all the CCAs participate in. They provide us with updates. If you look on our website, it's very rich with these sorts of documents, and she tries to maintain them. So in there, we've got CCA by CCA. They've contributed because, again, it's a unique situation. Tom has in here that's documented several things that the Central Coast Community Energy has done, but that might be different than, say, Sonoma Clean Power, who's been dealing, right in the face of the wildfire issues that they've been facing there, and have maybe some very customized solutions to resiliency issues there. So have a look in there. I think also, JR, when you post the PDF of the presentation, my very last slide has links to these sorts of documents.
And then I'll jump in real quickly as well. I mean, it's a great question, and it's one of the things that I and my team spend a lot of time on these days. And there's two challenges, massive challenges here as it relates to the conversations we're having here. One, a lot of the CCAs absolutely want to go out and provide resiliency, and there's the difference between reliability and resiliency, but resiliency services to their customers. In the current time frame, when we talk about resiliency, we're generally talking about providing some sort of electricity in the face of the public safety power shutoffs, one of my least favorite acronyms out there. The challenge for the CCAs is, they are a provider of electricity. They are not a provider of distribution and transmission services. And so there's some seams issues when PG&E or Edison decides they need to cut off the power. The power is being cut off to a CCA customer, and the CCA doesn't necessarily have any control over that at that moment in time. And then, as we've seen it more in the PG&E service territory, as PG&E tries to build out some resiliency solutions by installing generation on the local distribution grid that would provide electricity to CCA customers during the outage, you then have another question of, wait a minute, the utility, the IOU, is now providing a service to the CCA customers that the CCA is supposed to do. So it's a real struggle to work through those problems. And then the other one I just need to flag, because I hear it all the time, of like, we're going to provide solar panels and batteries to customers so that they can ride through a grid outage. Right now, if you were to do solar panels and enough batteries on a commercial structure, a grocery store, something like that, to go through a 24 to 36 hour outage that somebody might have because of a PSPS, it ain't going to work. It just physically is not going to work unless you're going to spend lots and lots of monies on batteries. So we still need to work a few more years at least through some technology cost transitions to get to that point where you can do a renewable microgrid that can truly island and provide full support to customers in the long run that's renewable. You can do it right now if there's gas involved. And some of the biggest examples of microgrids out there, it gets missed in the conversation that those microgrids actually have a gas generator as part of the overall system. So the microgrid solution can be very helpful, but we aren't quite there yet on the technology curves where it can truly be provide that resiliency and be fully renewable.
Great. Thank you, guys. I think we're actually running up against the end of our time. So I'm not sure if we have time for any more questions in this live chat. So I would just like to really quickly highlight some of our new research that's coming out on the energy side from the Luskin Center. We're releasing a report next week on demand response, and we evaluated some effective demand response program designs. And then, of course, the CCA report that we based our presentation on today. I'd also like to mention some of our upcoming webinars. The Luskin Center puts on a series of webinars throughout the year. Coming up next is Preparing for Even Wilder Wildfires, and a landmark opportunity for park equity. And you can find those on our website at the link there. I'd also like to say a thank you to our panelists, Ed, Angelina, and Tom, for your thoughts and this interesting conversation today, and Beth for presenting. I'd also like to thank Michelle, Christian, and Colleen from the Luskin Center for their work organizing and running this webinar behind the scenes. And thank you to all the participants for attending, for your interest in these important questions, and for participating today. And with that, that'll be it. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.